This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. While you might still be working on holiday shopping, we've got a daily gift for you that we're getting ready to unwrap. But first, let's talk about some new developments playing out around an important site in American history, Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack there in 1941 killed over 2,000 people and launched the US into World War II. Even today, it's still the site of an active military base. Just a couple of miles away from the memorial to the attack is Red Hill, an underground fuel storage facility that has existed since World War II and that can hold up to 250 million gallons of fuel. It's just one example of the aging military infrastructure we've seen across the country. Older fuel storage facilities are prone to leaks and have been shut down amid public pressure in places like Point Loma, California, and Manchester, Washington. But Red Hill is still open, and it also poses a very strong risk of affecting thousands more people. It's located just 100 feet above the aquifer that provides drinking water to much of the island of Oahu, home to Honolulu, and just over 1 million people. And the site has already leaked fuel. As far back as 2014, oil has leaked out of Red Hill. It's a situation that, for years, civilians on the ground have warned and military leaders have known could get a lot worse. In recent weeks, military families living on and near the base have reported sick pets and water that smells like oil. State health officials in Hawaii said earlier this month that the Navy's water system had levels of petroleum hundreds of times higher than the state's recommended limit. The Navy shut down the affected well after those reports, but environmental advocates say that isn't enough. Environmental advocates have called for the Navy to close the facility, and the state's leaders have pressured the Navy to address the issues.
We've seen the Navy continue to engage up to the present day in this pattern of denying issues, downplaying concerns, essentially repeating the same line that they'll somehow keep us safe, even as we are seeing repeatedly that they are simply not able to do so.
Wayne Chung Tanaka is the executive director of the Sierra Club of Hawaii. The environmental advocacy group has been pushing for military and civilian leaders to take drastic action.
There's really, at this point, only one thing that can protect us from catastrophic harm. The Navy needs to acknowledge that this facility, this 80-year-old facility, is an existential threat to our water supply and our way of life, and defuel the Red Hill fuel storage facility, get the fuel away from our drinking water.
But it's tough for the Navy to fix this issue. The Navy has said it hopes to empty the tanks by 2045, but in the meantime, the facility's design makes it basically impossible for Navy officials to access the concrete shells that hold the fuel in and fix them to stop leaks. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said last week that he's personally monitoring the situation and that DoD officials are working to address the problem. The Deputy Secretary of Defense visited Hawaii last Tuesday and said that she met with state and local officials and that, quote, "We also recognize we need to double down on our efforts to earn the trust and confidence of the people of Hawaii in our ability to manage this situation." But it's still a risk to civilians because the military base and Honolulu region have basically the same water source, and contaminated water from the base can leak into the civilian supply. That's the drinking water for 400,000 people who live in the area. Fortunately, there's no evidence yet that the civilian water supply has petroleum in it, but the contamination risks getting so large that it might be impossible to fix just by treating the water. So if this aquifer is unusable as a fresh water supply, it means the city might need to use other ones. But the problem with aquifers is that, as this graphic shows us, if the fresh water is used up too fast, they could start reaching down and getting salt water from further below the surface. It's a different problem, but it's one that could make drinking water shortages for people on Oahu even worse. All right, we want to dive in a bit more on Red Hill. And to do that, we're going to bring in Christina Jedra. She is a reporter for the Honolulu Civil Beat, covering the city and county of Honolulu. She's been digging into this story for the last few years and is an expert on all things relating to Red Hill. Christina, we really appreciate you being here. I'm curious to know, why has this threat to the drinking water for thousands of people been left simmering for so long?
The Navy has said for years that they had it under control and that they had all these safety measures in place and that it was not possible for the fuel to get into the water. And our government officials really hoped that was true and, allowed them to continue to operate. And now we're in a position where some activist fears have now been realized and the tune is changing a bit.
I'm curious to know, how important is Red Hill's fuel storage to the Navy and to the U.S. military presence in Hawaii?
According to the military, this fuel facility is a vital national security asset. It typically holds about 180 million gallons of fuel, and that's used by all branches of the military here in Hawaii. And we're obviously, a connection from the U.S. mainland to the rest of the world, being in the middle of the Pacific. The military also says that fuel in that place, it's gravity fed, so you don't need electricity or anything to run the facility. It would be helpful in a natural disaster. If everything else was down, we would still have fuel, is the military's argument.
Can you explain to our viewers how it is that the fate of the military base's water supply and the drinking water for so many folks in Honolulu are tied together?
We have one major aquifer here that services urban Honolulu. If you've ever visited Hawaii, maybe Waikiki you're familiar with, it's all in that zone, all the way to eastern Oahu, and it includes Pearl Harbor. And for those who don't know, an aquifer is basically an underground natural storage of water. It's in the little bubbles of lava rock that exist under the ground. And so basically the military and the civilian water utility are two straws sucking out of the same glass. It's the same water source. So when it becomes contaminated in one area, it's a big threat to the other side. At this point, the civilian water utility maintains that their water is safe to drink. They shut down their shaft that is closest to the contamination as a precaution, but they're watching it really closely because they're not sure exactly how much contamination there is, where it is, how fast it might be moving. So there's a lot of anxiety right now.
What have civilian leaders been doing to make sure people have access to clean water, and how sustainable might some of those approaches be?
Right now, our Honolulu Board of Water Supply, this is our civilian water utility, is using water from other wells, kind of further away from the contamination to service the community and meet demand right now. In Hawaii right now, we're more in the wet season, so we're able to get by with those other sources. But in the summer, they say we might actually have to start rationing water because we have a higher demand in the summer when it's hot. And if you pump those other wells too hard, you could actually salinate the aquifer. It would become salty. You want to only pump it at the level that it can naturally replenish. And so we could get in some trouble in the summer.
Christina Jedra, she is a reporter for the Honolulu Civil Beat and has been digging into this, is an expert on all things related to Red Hill. We appreciate you joining us on In the Loop.
Thanks so much for having me.